5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You blitz all night. And if they cross the line of scrimmage, I'm gonna take every last one of you out.
Hey, the Blitz is coming, boys.
What's going on? Welcome back to the Blitz, the show that provides you with the latest in news, tips, tricks, and advice, and so much more to get you ready for a new fantasy football season in just 5 minutes or less. Another term that players new to fantasy football might hear during their preparation is ADP. What does that mean? In this episode, I'll be breaking down what ADP is and how it can help you to get a handle on targeting players during your fantasy drafts this season. As always, before we get into the episode, make sure that you're following the Fantasy's Finest YouTube channel for the latest episodes of The Blitz. And as always, you can catch The Blitz in audio format in your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. And please do us a favor. Make sure to like, share, and comment on the podcast episode because it helps us grow our audience and we love engaging with our viewers and listeners. Now, let's jump right into breaking down what ADP is and how we can use it to prepare for our fantasy football drafts this season. So, to get us started, ADP stands for Average Draft Position, and honestly, the name tells you most of what you need to know. ADP is a measure where a player is typically drafted in fantasy football leagues. I'll give you an example. The Green Bay Packers running back Josh Jacobs is currently ranked as the RB18. That means he's the 18th best at his position. According to early draft board data, that means Josh Jacobs is being drafted somewhere in the 4th round. So if you see a player listed with an ADP of 18, you have a pretty good idea of when you might need to draft him if you want them on your team. So why does ADP matter? Now here's where ADP becomes really useful. ADP gives you a general idea of how much a player is worth in the fantasy marketplace. Think of it like a draft day map. You don't necessarily have to follow the map exactly, but it gives you an idea of where you're going. Another example of this is if you're looking at a player whose ADP you really like. Let's say a player whose ADP is 60. In this year's fantasy draft rankings, that's Cleveland Browns rookie wide receiver Denzel Boston at the wide receiver position. If you're sitting at pick 35, you probably don't want to take him just yet. You could potentially wait several rounds and still have a reasonable chance of getting him on your fantasy team. But there's another side to this. If you're sitting at pick 55 and you're thinking, I'll just wait until my next pick, you have to remember that other managers may want that player too. That's where understanding ADP can help you decide whether to take your guy now or risk waiting. This is probably the most important thing for beginners to understand. ADP is not the same thing as your player rankings. Let's say you have a player ranked 25th overall, but his ADP is 40. That means you think the player is being undervalued by the fantasy community. That's potentially an opportunity. You might be able to draft him earlier than his ADP because you believe he's going to outperform where he's being selected. On the other hand, maybe there's a player at let's say ADP 15 that you have ranked 30th. You might think he's being drafted too early. That's where you have to decide whether you want to follow the crowd or trust your own evaluation. This brings us to one of my favorite concepts when it comes to ADP. Value. Imagine you're picking number 50 overall. You look at the valuable players or available players and notice that a player you have ranked 35th is still sitting there. That's potentially a great value. You're getting a player you believe should be drafted 15 picks earlier. And this is one of the best ways beginners can use ADP. Don't just look at the player's name, look at where they're being drafted compared to where you think they should be drafted. That's where you can find value. ADP can also help you avoid something called a reach. A reach is when you select a player significantly earlier than where you probably needed to. Let's say a player has an ADP of 80, but you take him with the 35th pick. Maybe you absolutely love this player, and that's okay. But you potentially used a valuable pick on someone you might have been able to get later in the draft. Instead, you could potentially draft another player at 35 and wait for your preferred player later on in the draft. The key word here is potentially. ADP isn't a guarantee. Sometimes you have to reach for a player because you don't want to risk losing him. Another thing beginners should know is that ADP isn't set in stone. It changes throughout the offseason, and especially as we get closer to the start of the regular season. Injuries, trades, depth chart changes, preseason performances, and news can all affect where players are being drafted. So don't look at ADP numbers from months ago and assume it's still accurate. Use current ADP when you're preparing for your draft. So, if you're a fantasy football beginner, here's my simple advice. First, create your own player rankings. Second, look at the current ADP. Then compare the two. If your rankings are maybe similar or close enough, that's okay. But when you see a major difference, make sure to pay attention. Those differences can help you identify players you really like and players you may want to avoid at their current draft price. And remember, you don't have to draft exactly according to ADP. If you love a player, it's certainly okay to take them earlier. If you don't like a player, you don't have to draft them just because everyone else tells you to. ADP is a tool, not a rule. So let's bring it on home. ADP stands for average draft position. It tells you approximately where players are being selected in fantasy drafts. It can help you understand when players are likely to be available, identify potential values, avoid unnecessary reaches, and create a better draft strategy. But don't let ADP completely control your draft. Your rankings, your league settings, roster construction, and your personal player evaluations all matter too. If you're just getting started with fantasy football, understanding ADP is one of the first things I'd recommend learning. Because once you understand ADP, you're going to start looking at your draft completely differently. That's going to be it for today's episode. If you're new to fantasy football, make sure to stick with us because we'll be breaking down everything you need to know to help you build a championship caliber fantasy team. And of course, it's going to be done one topic at a time. Until next time, make sure that you prepare properly. And remember, don't just draft players, draft value. And make sure to subscribe to the Fantasy's Finest YouTube channel so you don't miss any episodes of The Blitz. And follow us on your preferred podcast platforms for more fantasy football content just like this. See you guys in the next episode.
Yo, come back now, yeah?